I'm getting a lot of looks from a lot of you out there saying, "Whoa, this guy can talk. He's always so quiet." I promise, I learned 2 weeks ago, so just bear with me. So to start off, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. It's a really big encouragement to see such a large crowd of people, especially on a Sunday night, to come worship, but also to come listen to a younger person talk. It's not very often that a person of my age gets to come up here and do a sermon to such a wonderful group of people. I'd also like to welcome any visitors that we have. If you're visiting with us, we're very thankful to have you here. And if anyone has a question about what I present tonight, please feel free to ask me or any one of our elders, and we would love to sit down and talk to you. And I would love to answer any questions that I can. If I don't have an immediate answer for you, I will do my absolute best to get you one and talk with you afterwards. I've learned a lot while working on this lesson, and I would love to learn more. So, to start off, before we get into the lesson, I kind of have to explain something for someone or for people that might not understand. But blacksmithing is a hobby that I get into. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is he talking about that? Well, it's because I use blacksmithing as an analogy for some points in my sermon. And not everyone understands what that is. So I wanted to briefly explain that before we got into it. So, blacksmithing, if you're kind of breaking it down to bare bones or whatever, is where you take metal and you stick it into a forge, which is basically just a furnace, and it gets really hot, like 3,000 degrees, even more sometimes. Makes the metal really, really, really bright orange, really hot, and you take it out and you put it on an anvil. Take a hammer, you can hit it, you can take pliers, you can bend it around, twist it, make it into all these different things. I've I've seen people make metal into knives. I've seen them make forks like silverware. I've even seen a woman make a very fancy toilet paper holder, which was odd to me, but it was her creation. If you'd like to go ahead and turn to Romans 5, that's where we'll be starting tonight. We're going to be starting off with the first 4 verses. And to introduce my lesson, what we're going to be reading first has a lot to do with hope. And that's what the lesson is on tonight, is hope. What can hope do for us? So starting with the first 4 verses, it says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope." So starting with hope, where do we get this hope from? Because I just read a verse talking about it, but if you don't know where we get it from, then why is it any good to you? Well, in verse 2, we get our hope from the grace and the glory of God. We get it through God. It doesn't just appear out of thin air. Well, okay, now we know where it comes from, but what does hope do? Well, in a way, hope produces more hope. And I know that might be kind of confusing at first. You might be asking yourself, well, how does it do that? Well, the hope that we've gotten from God allows us to glory in tribulations. So it allows us to persevere through trials or challenges that we might face in life, which then produces a stronger perseverance, which then allows us to build our character and our faith in God, which then leads us to having more hope. So I hope you can kind of get that idea of we start with hope, go around the big circle, and end back with hope. So now that we see that it builds the big circle, every time we go around that circle, we start with hope, persevere, and get back to hope, it expands. Because as I noted, every single time we do that, we grow. But why do we want that circle to expand? Well, that leads me to my second point. Now let's read verses 5 through 8 of Romans 5. starting with verse 5. Now, hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. For when we were still without strength, in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love towards us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So why is hope important? Well, as we learned previously, it allows us to grow stronger and build. We build perseverance, we build our faith, we build our character, and we build our hope. But it's also important because, as said in verse 5, it will never disappoint. It doesn't say that it, every now and then it'll stop you from it. It says it'll never disappoint. And then in verses 7 and 8, it talks about two men, a righteous man and a good man. And for this point, I'd like to refer to the righteous man as a fair man and the good man as a more than fair man. So when referring to these guys as the righteous man or the fair man, it says that no one would die for him. But the good man, people would dare to die for him. But in verse 6, it tells us that Christ died for sinners, people who were the lowest of the low, the ungodly. So what would that make him? Well, I would argue the point that it would make him better than both men, especially because he died for us, but it would make him better than the more fair man. Even during our lowest moments, God will always love us, no matter where we're at. His love has no bounds. He will do anything for us, as he showed with sending his son here to die for us. Everyone was a sinner, and he sent his own son here to die for us. And that is one of the biggest demonstrations of love ever. So with this information, we reinforce the point that hope is extremely important, because not only will it never disappoint us, but we have the love of God, we have perseverance, and we have the ability to build perseverance, character, faith, strengthen everything. So you might be thinking to yourself, wow, I have all this wonderful hope in the Lord, and I have all this stuff, but what do I need to use it for? I might be giving you ammunition, but if you don't know where to put it, then it's no use to you. Well, go ahead and turn over to James 1, because we're going to talk about exactly that. So we're going to be reading verses 2 through 4 to start off with. Starting at verse 2, it says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let the patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." So here, it's kind of odd, especially starting off with verse 2, because we see that we're told to rejoice in trials, or when we enter into a trial, which is odd to think about, because my first reaction whenever I'm faced with a challenge, especially something that could challenge me spiritually, is not to jump up and down with joy and be so happy because something bad might be happening in my life. But we're told that we should be happy. And not just to be happy that bad things are happening to you, but be happy because the more that we're tested, the more patience is produced. So that's why it's important for us to be positive during those times, because the more patience that's produced, it allows us to strengthen ourselves to get through the next trials that we might face. Rome was not built in a day. And that kind of is coming out of nowhere. But what I mean with that is that after the first couple of days, Rome was not this big kingdom that ruled the majority of the world and was so powerful people didn't even want to mess with it. It took time. It built. It started from small and got bigger. It's the same way that we are. Every time we hit a trial and we persevere through it, we strengthen each of our abilities. We might hit the first few trials and they might just be absolutely terrible. We might just be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm having to go through all this. But then if you take a minute and think back to verse 2, you realize you got to go through it and grow. It's our faith is not going to be perfect within the first trial that we face. So to recap real fast, we're going to go back to my blacksmithing analogy. So I hope that you all were listening in the beginning. But with blacksmithing, as we said before, you put the metal through the fire. And as many of you may have guessed by now, the fire is symbolic of the trials that we will face through life. But after we take the metal out of that fire, we're able to begin perfecting our creation, or we're beginning to perfect our faith. And then every time that we take that metal and we hit it and we form it the same way that we do with our faith, we get through the trial and we think back to it and be like, okay, I can build off of this. This is why I am stronger. I am stronger because I have gotten through this trial in my life. And then we cool down. The metal cools down. And then we get stronger with every single time we repeat that process. So in this big circle of hope, faith, patience, perseverance, it's always expanding with every trial we face. But there's one more thing that's produced. And I know you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I have so much love and so much hope in the Lord. What else could possibly be produced? It's okay, Mr. Rusty, calm down. Okay, I'm going to tell you. It produces wisdom. And to get this wisdom, we have to go through these trials that we face. Which means that, yes, even if you thought that you were somehow going to get out of work and everything was going to be perfectly fine for you, you're still going to have to face trials in life. Sorry to let you know, but I'd like to take two biblical examples and focus on them for just a quick minute. My first one is going to be Job. It's someone that we're all familiar with, but his whole family was killed. His wife told him to curse God and die. His friends were giving him horrible advice. All these terrible things happened to him. And it was a pretty rough story. I read the whole book while preparing for this lesson. But something that stuck out to me was that during all this time of everything going bad for him, God still said that he perceived Job as a blameless man. And he even went so far as to say that he loved God so much that no one else was like him. And that's a pretty big compliment. If God said that about me, I'd be knocked off my feet. I couldn't believe that. My second example that I'd like to talk about is Paul, another person who's very famous in the Bible, but he was run out of town countless times for preaching the truth. He was falsely accused of his crimes, and then he was imprisoned. With these two examples, they both have something in common, and it's the fact that the world did absolutely nothing good for them. It only hurt them. They both had terrible things happen to them, but they still somehow remained faithful towards God. And so that's a big question. It's like, how did they do that? Well, they had the wisdom of God. Well, how do we obtain that wisdom? Well, let's slide down to James 1, 5 through 8 real fast. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So very clearly, we're told that if we lack wisdom, we should ask God for help, and he'll give it to us. But it's not that simple. It also goes on to say that we have to be completely dedicated towards God. For him to be able to share his wisdom with us, we can't be halfway relying on God and then halfway relying on the world to help us through our problems. So the big part of this is the fact that we need to completely cut off the world. So another quick recap. We've covered that we will face trials and that we face these trials and rejoice because we have the Lord to help us. The Lord loves us and gives us his hope through these trials that we face, which in turn strengthens every single part of us. It strengthens our perseverance. It allows us to go through more trials. And no matter how hard they get, we know that he'll be with us because he loves us. But it also strengthens our faith, knowing that we are able to trust him and know that he'll always be there for us. Because just as he sent Jesus here to die for us, no matter how terrible of a spot we may be in, he's going to help us. He wants to help us. As we go through these trials and go through life, the older we get, they might get more difficult, they might change. But as long as we remain fully dedicated and faithful towards God, then it doesn't matter what it is. We'll be completely unscathed, which sounds good and all, but that's something that takes a lot of dedication and constant work. And as mentioned before, we're striving for that perfection. We're trying to perfect our faith. It's not going to happen right away. So as we go through life, it's not going to be easy. You have to go through the fire. You have to come out of it, and you have to be able and be willing to learn and say, okay, this is how I need to get stronger, or this is what I might need to change, or this is how I could have handled this situation better. So as we strive for that perfection, there's one more step that we have to do before we can obtain that wisdom. You can go ahead and flip over to Matthew 6. We're going to be reading verses 19 through 21. But before we do that, we partially covered it in the last point. But one of the biggest things that we need to do so that God will share his wisdom is completely cut off the world. I said it earlier, we need to completely cut it off, not put it to the side and then go back to it when we need it. Not halfway where we listen to God in one ear and then the other ear we turn around and listen to people of the world and say, oh, well, I'm having this problem. Maybe I'm having trouble finding a job, so I'm going to go talk to my friends instead of sit here and pray to God and fully dedicate myself and say, Lord, please help me. What do I need to do so that I can make it? This world is entirely unstable. And as we see with Job and Paul, it's never done any good for us. Let's go ahead and read Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Starting with verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And to take a quick moment, I would like to say that I hope everything that I have said has been beneficial for everyone so far. I would like to also restate that if anyone has any questions about what I may have said, I would openly invite them to come and talk with me because I would love to answer any questions. I would love an opportunity to learn more about God's word. But as it is said in verses 19 through 21, it is very simply put that we need to lay up our treasures in heaven and not on earth. And that's a very kind of, I don't want to say cliche, but that's something we hear a lot. But what does it mean? Well, as I've said multiple times so far, the world has never done any good for us. So why would we put our treasures here, a place that has only ever mistreated us, only ever mistreated Job, Paul, people in the past, instead of putting our treasures towards heaven and towards someone who has loved us so much that they sent their own son to die here? Not just die in any normal way, but die in probably one of the more gruesome ways ever recorded in history. And after all that Job went through, do you really think that he would be able to put his faith back in the world after he recovered? I don't think he would have ever. I think he may have cut off the world entirely. I don't know about you guys, but if I had a family and they were all killed and then my wife immediately turned around and told me to curse God, I don't think I could ever consider putting my faith in the world ever again. I couldn't even look at it the same way that I would have before. But when we put our treasure up in heaven, we put our hearts up there as well. We gain that peace and stability that people in the world will strive for. People will go their entire lives trying to figure out handling their challenges. They'll lose sleep at night. They'll be unstable. They'll have panic attacks. And they won't even once consider God and His Word and the love that He has for us as a source for hope and a way to get help through their life. But God has hope and love for everyone. And as we've said before, it's not bound. It's not only there for when He wants to give it to us. He'll be willing to give His wisdom and His love to anyone. We just have to be willing to dedicate ourselves and have a full faith towards Him. We can't be halfway with Him. Very quickly, let's turn over to John 16. We're going to be reading verses 31 to 33. To start with verse 31, it says, Jesus answered them, "Do you now believe? Indeed, the hour is coming, yes, has now come, that you will be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because my Father is with me. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." When I was preparing for this lesson, I went to Jason and Andrew to help because I figured they would be a good source of information considering it's their job. But the moment, a quote that Jason said, and it was it stuck with me a lot because it's something I had never heard before. But he said, "The moment we give up on the world is the moment the world will hate us." And I've never thought about that before. Because most of the time, if you're having a good day, you don't think anything's wrong with that. But if you're having a good day in the world, you might need to take a step back and realize, hey, I don't need to let myself get dragged into the world. Because as I remember with Paul and Job, it hurt them. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to have a good day, but don't let it cloud your mind so much that you stop putting your faith in God and start putting it more towards the world. It also goes on to say that in John 16, that even when we might be alone, He will always be with us. And even when we are alone, we will always have that peace. Now, I'm going to turn over to 2 Peter 3, verse 10. You don't have to turn there as well, but I will go ahead and read it for you. Starting in verse 10, it says, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up." It's a pretty powerful verse. We do not know when the end of the world will happen, plain and simple. But the question I have for everyone here tonight is that why would we put our faith in something that might not be here tomorrow, something that steals from us, something that will rust away, instead of putting our faith in someone that has sent their own Son here to die for us, has given us the steps to salvation, has given us His unconditional love, the ability to have His wisdom given to us as long as we are 100% faithful to Him, and also provides us with a way to make it through the challenges that we'll face in this life. He's given us the steps of how to receive all these things, but people will still put their faith in the world and let it hurt them. If any of you have not been baptized but would like to be, you realize that you've been putting your faith in the world, but you'd like to change that. If you'd like to strengthen your faith and decided that you want to cut off the world and be saved through baptism so that you can have the wonderful hope in the wonderful circle that is always expanding that I talked about tonight. Or if you have been baptized, you have been saved, but you've started putting more faith towards the world once again, I would beg of you that you come back and make things right with God as we stand and as we sing.
Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His gracious now? Are you washed in the blood of